Hi, I'm Joanne Woodsum, a solo practitioner specializing in commercial leasing law. I've been a lawyer for a long time, and I know that there's a lot to wrap your head around when it comes to commercial leasing. The goal of my podcast, the Commercial Leasing Diva podcast, is to make your lives as commercial leasing professionals easier and more fun. In the podcast, I speak to other commercial leasing professionals who share their expertise so that we can all improve our commercial leasing game and better serve our clients. Today's guest is Carrie Bobb. Carrie is CEO of Carrie Bobb and Company. She is a specialist in retail leasing, both in San Diego and now in Nashville after a recent relocation there. As we'll hear from the conversation, Carrie also has a specialty in social media and commercial leasing. And I know you're going to learn a lot from listening to us. Enjoy. So where are you these days?
I'm in Nashville. I don't know if you heard.
I know, I'm seeing on Instagram. I'm like, did that lady move over to Nashville, Tennessee?
I did.
That's exciting.
It's been really great. We're so happy here. It's definitely different. And we're kind of like, what did we just do? But in all the best ways. We really, really love it. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm currently in Reno, but I spent about 6 months this year in Italy, which was very nice.
Oh my gosh. So how did that happen?
I just was like, fully remote. I can be fully remote anywhere. So why don't I just go plunk down somewhere? And
that's amazing.
Yeah. So it was really nice. It was really nice.
That's amazing. Good for you.
Yeah. So now I'm back in Reno, and of course I'm licensed in Reno, in Nevada and California. So.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Are you still busy as ever?
It's really busy.
Yeah.
It's, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The market is just crazy pants. So I usually like to start with just having people introduce themselves. So you've got two parts. One is I was interested in just you talking about how you founded your own company and your initial time in San Diego. And then maybe you could tell us a little bit about how you made the move to Nashville and maybe differences between Nashville and San Diego. That'd be super interesting.
Yeah, for sure. You want me to just jump into it?
Just jump in.
Okay. So I have been in commercial real estate, specifically retail, for over 20 years. 16 of those, and all of those were in San Diego. And 16 of them were with CBRE in their San Diego office. And then in 2019, I started Carrie Bobb & Co., which is my own retail brokerage company. And then shortly thereafter, I also started a social media company for commercial real estate, which I'm sure we'll talk about because it's so interesting what's happening through social commerce and things like that. So I've been running these two parallel paths, which has just been fascinating. And I love both sides of the business, and I've just done a lot with retail brokerage in Southern California, have learned a lot. I absolutely love it. And then over the summer, actually in the spring, my husband and I kind of looked at each other and went, if we were ever going to move, our kids are at the right age where we could do something different. And we were ready for a change, but we also didn't want to change for the sake of changing. And Nashville was the one spot that I felt like we could go to tomorrow and I'd be fine because I just love the city. I love the people, the energy is good. And so we went and visited in the spring. And then by July, we were residents of Tennessee, and everything just happened so fast. And we said all the doors have to open for us to do this because we have a great life in San Diego and we've been there forever, that we're not going to force this. Things have to kind of fall into place, and everything kind of did. And we absolutely love it. I'm so glad we're here. And my husband still has his job in San Diego. He works for an in-house retail developer landlord. So he commutes maybe quarterly. So we still have our connection there. For sure.
Right. And so you're also doing the same thing with your company in Nashville in terms of retail brokerage, or are you just doing social media, or how is that working?
I'm doing both. The plan for right now is to be just running my own brokerage, and we still have the social media company. Most of my team's in San Diego. We have people in Orlando.
So just as an aside, I am a huge country music fan. were you a country music fan before you moved to Nashville?
Yes, yes, yes. I love country. I'm wearing boots right now, so
Okay, good, good, good.
you know.
All right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because it strikes me that that's, it's sort of like when you're in retail in LA, there's this whole extra layer in Nashville, I assume, of, like Blake Shelton and all these people who have their own businesses and their own retail outlets. And so it's just
really
kind of
cool.
fun.
It's super fun, and it makes me think that Nashville has got to be something like what Hollywood was like in the 1950s, because you have all these celebrities, not just country artists, but you have actors and just high profile people. But I think they're drawn to a city like Nashville because it's still feels like a small town, and everybody's a little bit more like under the radar. And I think they like being not so out in front of everything. And my guess is
Right,
most of them go to LA, do their work and
right,
everything when they're on, and then they like kind of being under the radar here. And I just
right.
love that. I love that
Yeah,
vibe.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, now I'm going to Nashville real soon
You
and we'll
have
have lunch.
to. Oh, for sure. Come visit. You have to.
I mean, I was just watching last night something and the commercial came on for the Grand Ole Opry and I'm like, I just need to
We're
go.
going. When you come,
Yeah, I was supposed to go several years ago and then there was that big flood and I had to
oh
cancel my
yeah.
trip. So yeah. Okay. All right, exciting. So I wanted to be sure I have a, sort of standard list of questions, but I think if I recall correctly, and it's clear from your Instagram as well, that you have a specific focus in retail on women-owned businesses. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how that came about and what your experience has been like working with that group.
I love this question
Very
so
diverse
much.
group.
So it started because I had heard the statistic that 80 women make up 85% of all consumer purchases. And so they're influencing so much of the retail economy and industry. And just as I was building my business, the thought process, and women also, 91% of women tend to share information on like deals, or even like at my kids' school, moms are passing around like how to make things easier and things like that. And I had thought, I wonder if it would apply to female entrepreneurs too, if a landlord focused on female entrepreneurs and merchandising their projects. So my main focus in retail commercial real estate is ground up mixed use developments and helping landlords merchandise their projects and curate the right type of retail that will add the most value to the project. And so I put an emphasis on female entrepreneurs and female owned businesses. And what happened was they all start cross promoting each other and helping each other. And so the projects become more successful. So it's not an exclusive, excluding male owned businesses by any means. It's just you have to make sure that that's somehow a component of a project, because women do such a good job of working together to make sure everyone is successful.
I think that one of the interesting things that I have seen in my experience where you have a women-centric project, whether it's, I do my leasing law conference or retail, is that the standard wisdom is you would never collaborate with your competitors, right? Of course, you have to sort of, everyone's in a silo and you kind of guard your own promotion. And what I have discovered is exactly what you're talking about, which is when women are the focus of whatever the project is, you actually get this intense synergy and collaborative spirit that lifts up everybody.
Right.
And it's amazing to see. And it really turns that conventional wisdom of like, oh, you don't work with your competitors. Absolutely. I've had the opposite experience, and it sounds like you have had that too.
Right. It might be a little counterintuitive because you might think you're competing with the shops next door, like you're saying, but it's really not. Everyone needs to work together. And
right.
I haven't experienced really any negative ramifications to that. You hear some property managers talk about how some people might be kind of difficult, but it's never like because they're not getting along with.
Right.
Or I haven't heard that. Yeah.
Right. So a little jaunt down memory lane. Pre-pandemic, if you could take a snapshot of retail in San Diego, what were you seeing?
just so much activity. And I think this is indicative of a lot of major markets where there was a lot of draw to urban, mixed use, things like that, and walkable cities and markets and shops and opportunities. And that's still there. That's still happening, but it's kind of taken a step back. And I think retailers and restaurants are looking at the tertiary markets. You know, ULI just came out with their top markets in the US, and Nashville was number one for, I think it's the third
Wow.
year in a row, which is really
Wow.
amazing. But you're seeing markets like Tampa and places like that where the focus, and I think it's good and bad. It's great for these tertiary markets. They're kind of coming into their own and becoming who they're supposed to be. But at the same time, it also makes me like hold my breath for a minute, because we need those metro markets and we need those urban markets, and it's not like they're bad.
Right.
And so I'm a little torn on that, because that's what I'm seeing.
Right.
But yeah.
So obviously, as we all know, the pandemic hit retail and restaurant really hard, brutally hard. Are there lessons from that period from either the landlord or the tenant side that you have seen, which now get incorporated into letters of intent? Or is it like in some other sectors, like I would say office, where we all just pretend that never happened? And letters of intent, if you looked at one today and compared it to 2019, they would look very similar in the office market. But in retail and restaurant, are you seeing any effort to take into account what happened and what might happen again?
I'm seeing effort. People are trying. I'm not seeing it actually get through. And I wouldn't say that they're just pretending it didn't happen. It's kind of like the food chain, right? You get up to whoever's making the decisions. And a lot of times it's either the insurance companies or the capital, the banks, or the people who are financing these properties. It's not just the landlord themselves. And they're just saying, no, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. And it depends on how desirable the property is. But a lot of times retailers are like, okay, well, we'll plan on negotiating it if it happens again. But I don't think a lot of people really know how to get through it. Are you seeing any good language or anything that works?
I think what's really interesting is that, having lived through the Great Recession in 2008, we saw after, 18 months after that started, a very strong tenant market across, I would say, all sectors. And tenants were very aggressively negotiating in letters of intent for Prop 13 protection, cap on CAM, obviously very low rents, et cetera. What I'm seeing this time, and it'd be interesting to study the psychology of this, landlords are being extremely firm in holding the line.
Right.
And they are very unwilling. And this is very, during the height of the pandemic, I thought for sure everything would change.
Same.
I mean, how could it not? We've just seen something that we never thought we would see before. And we're like, okay, well, now you can plan for it. Because now, maybe it's not COVID, but it could be anything. We now know, which we didn't know before. But I'm just seeing landlords be very, very firm. Even I'm not seeing rents decline as fast as I would think that they should be declining given market conditions. Retail seems to be very robust in many, many markets. And so I'm not seeing landlords make huge concessions. The one market that I work in a lot that I'm seeing a little bit of movement in retail is downtown San Francisco. And that is because for historic reasons, it's just a ghost town right now.
It's heartbreaking.
It is so heartbreaking.
Absolutely heartbreaking to see. And I think, when you were talking about how landlords aren't budging, so much of it has to do with the sales. And in some places, people are now back and they're performing well. So that digs them in even more. So you're not going to see it as much. And the places that have been hit the hardest, like San Francisco, which is so hard to see, there's movement, but there's still not a lot what you would think.
Right. Yes. It's very, it's very surprising to me. And I think you sort of hit the nail on the head before when you said it's because the institutional landlords, the pension funds, the banks, the insurance companies, they have a very narrow parameters for being able to operate and make concessions because of who their ultimate client, so to speak, is.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a result, we're just seeing huge vacancies. And you would think that would lead to a market correction, but so far it's really not in most markets. Then on the other hand, all the brokers I speak to who are in suburbs, at least in Northern California, it's all great. So
Right.
whether you're in Walnut Creek or you're in Menlo Park, it's fantastic, because people don't want to commute, but maybe they need to have an office close to home. And so they might have a little 4,000-foot imprint for their office. And of course, then all the people that rely on office workers being there, like Pilates and a little restaurant and a little retailer, they're all then attracted to that as well. So the suburban situation seems to be going very well.
Yeah. Yeah, especially in those affluent markets where you have high education, high income, where they're trying to live this hybrid life of both working from the office, but also still holding on to what COVID and the pandemic brought us. It's like, oh, I can still like drive my kids to school and be at the office and work this hybrid style. And I think those markets where you have those kind of consumers are really strong for retail. And I think with all of the density and everything, and even we're kind of seeing like the exodus of California, I still think those pockets, people are doing really good. The vacancy rate is low, where the sales are high. Like in like northern San Diego County and Orange County, you still have really strong sales and people are still performing. You have a lot of that kind of demographic there too.
Right. So even if you have to go to work 2 days a week in downtown LA, you're still spending 3 more days a week at home. And again,
Right.
you're, going to, if you might go to a gym by your office, now you're going to the gym by your home because it's just so much more convenient in the supermarkets
Right.
and all the other businesses. So it's a very interesting shift we're seeing, which maybe was a little bit on the horizon before the pandemic, but now certainly is blossoming like crazy. So when you begin representing a tenant client, say, especially if you're dealing with a lot of entrepreneurs or maybe just starting their first business, what are some of the basic information that you provide to them about lease economics and how it works for your typical retailer at the letter of intent stage?
Right. It's all about a function of sales. And some of my highest performing posts have been educating people on how to back into what a healthy rent to sales ratio is.
Yeah, can you talk about that? Because people really don't understand this. And it's kind of a formula, right?
Right. It's super, and that's whenever I've seen startup retail businesses get into trouble. It's they were just way out of whack on their, they think they'll be able to perform a certain amount. But basically a healthy rent to sales ratio is anywhere from 9 to 12%. If you start getting over 12%, the landlord's watching going, okay, your rent is now more than 12% of your sales, which means you're on our watch list. So how you would back into it, I'll do a quick, easy math. And this is how I did it on a few of my posts. And I think it helps people. So if you're trying to take 1,000 square foot space, and let's say the rent is $5 a foot per month or $60 a foot per year. So we'll do 60 times 1,000, that's 60,000 a year. And let's say you're trying to keep your rent at 9% of your sales. So you divide by 9%. So that would be $660,000. So
that's your sales target.
That's your threshold. You know that if you can do 600,000 in volume out of that store, that rent is sustainable. And that doesn't include triple net charges or anything like that. That's just a round number, but that's an easy way for people to understand, is this space affordable for me? Because sometimes I think they go, oh, it's, $5,000 a month. I can afford $5,000 a month. But then when you really look at it, they're a little in over their skis. So that's the first thing I would say.
Yeah.
And then then
when you're talking to the tenant, how do you help them understand whether that level of sales is achievable, especially if you don't have other stores? So for instance, I know, like say the Ferry Building in San
Hmm.
Francisco, which, is
Amazing.
the super modern contemporary food court, but, extremely high end. Often what the landlords will say to the tenants is, I can charge you the rent I'm charging you because what we see typically is $500 in sales a square foot per year,
Hmm.
which is a very high number. How do you help tenants understand, well, is that target gross sales threshold possible in this location?
When you're talking about an iconic property like the Ferry Building or whatever building it is in your market, I would find it hard to believe that a landlord would just take a flyer on somebody who hasn't had sales or a brand or presence that can say, I can hit X amount of numbers. I also wouldn't recommend somebody jump into a project like that because it's really intense and there's a lot to it. And so if you're a true retailer, if you start with a social presence and you're able to say, I got this amount of sales just through social, and you can have proof of sales, then I think you could go straight to an iconic building or a high rent district. But if you have nothing, I would recommend lowering the bar a little bit because
Yeah,
you're going to probably have to sign a personal guarantee or something like that. So you're going to have a lot of at stake that
right,
you kind of want to hedge your bets a little bit and make sure that you can actually perform.
right. And in that regard, can you talk a little bit about pop-ups and how that works in terms of people trying to see, would this be a viable location for us?
Yeah, I think they're great for startups or just entrepreneurs putting something together. They're hard to manage from a property management standpoint. But
So can you just say what a pop-up is for people who may not know?
so someone who's doing a month to month lease and you have no guarantee of being there for an extra 30 days, or it could just be a 90-day pop up. It could be a seasonal thing. And I think those are great. And that's a great option for an entrepreneur if there's a project that they want to be in. It doesn't work for restaurants or like fast casual, but for like a true retailer or service provider, I think approaching the landlord and just saying, hey, I really want to test this out. If you see they have a vacancy, it's a great option for them to put some activity in the center and you test out your sales. And
Mhm,
you can do things where like if I hit X amount of sales, I want to convert it to a permanent lease,
mhm,
things like that. You can do, sometimes landlords charge a flat rate for pop-ups and then they want a cut of whatever the sales
mhm,
are, like a percentage
mhm.
rent. So there's all sorts of things like that. But I think pop-ups are a great starting place for people who are trying to get their proof of sales built.
And what I've seen is some landlords in their projects will specifically set aside a little spot, and
Hmm.
that's designated as pop-up, where they just kind of serially try out, new business ideas. And a lot of times, at least in San Francisco, what I've seen is it sort of comes, there's like a pipeline from the farmer's market. So someone's
Right.
had a stand at the farmer's market and they've been doing that for a few years. They've got a product, they've got social, and the landlord says, okay, we'll come over here for a couple months. And what I see is that the small business owner then has a chance to see, oh, this is what it's like to be in downtown San Francisco in a primo
Yes.
shopping center. And, they kind of have some real world experience before they have to sign a 5-year lease or a 10-year lease.
Right. Yeah. No, I think they're great. And then I think with something like that, can I talk about social for a second and how important it is?
Absolutely. Why don't you talk about your social media company, how you founded it, and what you're seeing in terms of retail and social media kind of merging?
Well, we were running it for clients under the brokerage business, and then we just realized it really needed to be its own
So
separate
when you say running it, why
company.
don't you describe? I follow you on Instagram, but what is it exactly that you're doing in social?
So we are running handles, social media handles for retail properties. In 2023, we're getting into other verticals and other product lines as well. But we help landlords speak to their core consumer. And this is true for retailers or young entrepreneurs. It's really identifying who your core customer is and who you're speaking to. I think social is a great way to understand who your core consumer is by looking at your insights and analytics. And so that's what we do for our clients are truly the commercial real estate owners.
Mhm.
But why that's so important is because in 2022, it's estimated that there's going to be $958 billion in retail sales transacted through social media. So this is different than e-commerce.
Right.
And so almost $1 trillion will be spent through social media apps. And the social commerce space is growing at 3 times the rate as e-commerce.
Right.
Just to put it into perspective, I'm 44 years old, and when I started in retail brokerage, there was no online shopping. So
Right.
how people spend their money and how they interact with brands and how they actually transact has changed a lot over 20 years. And I think one of the biggest mistakes I see as we go into properties and help landlords and shopping centers with their socials, we run into a lot of mom and pops and they just say, oh, I don't have time to do social, or I'm not on it. That is the biggest mistake they can make. You need both. You need both brick and mortar and social and e-commerce. And it's worth paying someone to help you get your legs under you, because that's just the way everything's going. Now, the brick and mortar is important because convenience is important and all the part of the experiential retail. And we're seeing that through the pandemic. People are coming back. They're craving like the community that retail provides.
Right.
And so anyway, I nerd out on that. I could go on about that forever.
So my question is, I see how for the retailer tenant, so I'm Joanne's Donut Shops, and I'm in, mega shopping center in downtown, wherever. I can see how my Instagram, Joanne's Donuts, and today we have jelly filled, today we have Christmas seasonal. That helps me. What's your pitch to the landlord about this? How does what I'm doing make a difference to the landlord?
Well, it's more the other way around. How can the landlord help their tenants
Okay.
drive more sales? And so
Okay.
the biggest thing is TikTok surpassed Google as the #1 search engine last year. So people are using Google or TikTok and Instagram as search engines more than Google. And so a
Yeah, I had no
landlord,
idea.
isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
And 62% of social commerce is driven from Gen Z. So the youngest generation is driving so much of that traffic, and this is how they are transacting. This is how they're searching things and finding information. And so for a landlord or a property to not have a social media handle is the equivalent of not having a website
Okay.
today. So you
Okay.
have to have a social handle, and the feed has to be meaningful. It has to engage with the consumer or your prospective tenant or whoever your audience is in such a way that it, I would say, converts, but it doesn't always have to like become transactional. It might get somebody on property, it might drive sales to one of your tenants, but it matters to the community that you're trying to create. And one of the most interesting pieces that we had done was it was in Pacific City, in Huntington Beach, and we were helping the landlord there, and they had a new tenant that was going to take 800 square feet in the food hall, and she was a chocolatier. She wasn't open yet. She didn't have her permits, and they just asked us to help her with creating content for when she opens, we could have some professional photos and things like that. So we did, and while we were standing there, I was shooting video. And she asked me, she's like, what are you doing? And I go, I'm going to create a reel for when you open. She's like, oh, I've never made a reel. So I teach her how to make a reel. She posts her very first reel, and she said she had 1,700 sales through Instagram before her store was even open.
Wow.
And so now that landlord is helping her drive sales both digitally and through brick and mortar.
Right.
And that's really the beauty of like how you can use these tools to also, like, retailers are driving almost $1 trillion in social commerce, and like how can brick and mortar landlords like get in the game is that's how Hello Jenny started.
So the landlord's getting in there, he's helping his little tenants get traffic. in the old school, you're thinking, okay, if I'm a landlord, I'm getting percentage rent, and the game, with the beginning of e-commerce was how do I figure out a way that if the thing was ordered at the store, ordered through the website, or delivered to the store, like there were all these machinations, like I want to capture all these gross sales so that I, landlord, get some upside from this. How does it work with social media? So if I'm a Joanne's Donuts and I'm selling stuff on Instagram, selling my donuts, and maybe I DoorDash them or whatever, FedEx them, who knows? How is the landlord participating in that?
That's a really tricky one. And like ever since online shopping came to be a thing, like you mentioned, that's always been a tough nut to crack.
Yeah.
I have not seen any landlord get participation in social media sales. But what I have seen is landlords get participation in marketing funds. And then I think because right now it's still so rare, I think in 5 years, every major brokerage house is going to be offering social media as a service. And this will just be business as usual in 5 years. But I think, especially right now, it's a differentiator and a competitive edge for landlords to say, this is what we offer our tenants. We help you drive traffic, especially for those local mom and pops who might not have a major presence. Sometimes the shopping center itself has a larger following, like a community page. And so I think, and that's worth something, and you'll see it through either higher rents or some of the marketing funds, things like that.
So I guess that's sort of the way it ultimately shakes out, is to the extent the tenants are experiencing very high gross sales from whatever platform, brick and mortar or other platforms, that helps to drive the base rent up that the landlord can charge at that location.
Yeah, and I don't see that changing as of right now from this perspective, because I think all the lines are being blurred from all the different touch points of how you can actually purchase something or have an experience with a brand. And so the landlords who provide the best experiences and provide the most amount of touch points will benefit from that through base rent.
Right. So in your letters of intent, it used to be percentage rent was extremely common. I don't see it so much anymore. Do you see it a lot, the percentage rent payment requirement? If the tenant sales exceed a certain number, then landlord gets some of that money?
Yeah, I'm still seeing it.
Yeah. Is there a particular sector that tends to have to pay percentage rent, restaurants or clothing stores, or just is it geographic or types of landlords?
I don't have anything specific for that. I do think, especially full service sit down restaurants, they will sometimes raise the break point and they'll raise the bar. So we're seeing that. But no, I haven't seen specific sectors carving it out or having certain hurdles or anything like that.
Right. Okay. So at the letter of intent stage, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see clients make or almost make when it comes to retail letters of intent?
When they're first starting out, I think the personal guarantee is a real big one. And there's ways to do it where they can limit their guarantee, but I get why the landlord's requiring it. You need to know that they've got skin in the game and things like that. One of the biggest, I wouldn't say biggest, but it's language that I like, is the rolling guarantee, where it's like they're responsible for the next 2 years throughout the term of the lease until the end of the initial term or something like that. So they might be responsible for 2 years at any point throughout the lease rather than a full 7 or 10 years. And I think people don't understand how much that would impact them personally if things don't work out. And then I think I've seen partnerships not go as planned and they didn't work that out well. And so I think working the partnerships out and things like that. There's so many nuances to a retail lease. I would say exclusives, but I think that used to be the way it was 10 years ago, is not having an exclusive in the project. but I don't think it's that way anymore. As a consumer, I get it to some extent where you're just trying to protect your space, but there are so many new concepts and things that are emerging every day that the lines are just being blurred so much.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else about the current state of marketing? I mean, you've of letters of intent, you shared social and how big that is, and obviously that's not even the wave of the future. We're riding that wave right now, and obviously you're on the cutting edge of it. If you're crystal balling, what do you see in terms of the evolution of retail in the coming years?
Such a good question. I think you're going to see more consumer participation in retailer brands, and not just like at the influencer level, but people genuinely being like part of brands. And I've heard someone describe it kind of like a flow from Progressive, where you have like key people that are championing these brands, and we all have the ability to do it. I think influencers that term has become a little cheaper than, because so many people are trying to get into that space, than what it actually is, than true people who are educated on a brand are really doing that. But I think you're going to continue to have in-store opportunities for things like that. And with AI and all of that, there's going to be so many different experiences that people can have with retail brands. I think the tertiary markets are going to continue to explode, both in population and in retail potential. I mean, some of the sales that I'm hearing here in Nashville, and I'm still new, I've only been here 6 months, but the sales volumes that are coming out of here are on par with sales in Southern California with less than half the population.
Wow.
And is
that demographically because the population is so much more well-to-do, or they're just spending more?
I think there's less retail, and there are less opportunities than what you have in some of the more dense markets. I think some of it's tourism.
I was going to say, yeah.
But some of it's just what's happening with, Amazon opened their second headquarters here, and you're seeing a lot of the headquarters moving into some of these markets. Like I know the same thing's happening in Atlanta and in Florida. And so I think you're going to see these tertiary markets start bringing sales volumes that are on par with what they used to be in some of these much more dense markets. I mean, Atlanta's super dense, but
right.
Yeah.
Right. Interesting. Well, I don't want to keep you too much longer. I know that we could talk, I'm sure, for more hours. And I guess I should really think about maybe doing a series on social and really getting more nitty gritty into the mechanics of that. Like, for instance, I'd be so interested to see like your slide deck when you go to a potential landlord and say, this is what my social media company could do for you. I think people would be super interested in what that pitch looks like. And it's especially interesting to me because landlords, in my experience, a lot of them are very much like lawyers, and that is they're kind of Luddites, they're kind of conservative, they're kind of way behind the times. And so I can imagine, going to a law firm and saying, you have to have social, and be like, what are you even talking about?
I would say the one difference, though, is the retail landlords know they need it. They just don't totally understand how it works.
Right.
And so that's a major differentiator, because they know they need it. They're just not
They
sure.
just need to be educated.
Yeah. And so that's been really fun, and getting to show the insights and analytics of how it's moving the needle. Yeah, I'd love to show you that. I'd also be happy to speak to how individuals can actually further their career through it too, because I think with LinkedIn, there's so much opportunity there, and that's the lowest barrier to entry to really make a difference or name for yourself on LinkedIn. And there's a lot of opportunity in our industry for sure.
That would be a great presentation to lawyers, would be sort of self-marketing. So I will put that in my thinking cap for a future project. Well, again, Carrie, it was so great talking to you and catching up with you. And I'm for sure going to Nashville. I don't know when.
We're going to go listen to some music.
It's been on my bucket list for a long time, and I know I need to get there.
You got to do it. You got to do
So,
it.
well, it was great talking to you. Happy holidays. And I will be in touch on to let you know all the socials and how we're promoting this. I, by the way, hired an assistant last summer because I was
Fantastic.
getting ready to launch this online course, which is coming out in March. And, I took Amy Porterfield's course, if you know her, on
Oh
how to
yeah,
do
love
online
her.
courses.
She just moved to
and
Nashville from San Diego too.
I know. I've got all these people in my head that I follow on Instagram that just moved to Nashville. And that's right. Amy's one of them. And I just got so overwhelmed. I'm like, this social stuff is too much. I need a helper. And boy, it has changed my life to have someone who
so
understands
great.
the ins and outs of social media. She has a social media schedule for me. She helps me do the reels. 2 weeks ago, I had to do my professional photo session. I mean, she's like, yes, you're going to need to be having pictures of you going like this and this and this and this. And I was like, oh, what am I doing? So it's been invaluable to me to have a social media specialist on my team.
That's awesome.
It's changed my whole life. So I really appreciate what you do. Okay, well, happy holidays, and we will be in touch soon.
You too. Thank you so much for having me. It was good to see you.
All right, thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.
I'm Joanne Woodsum. Thanks for listening to the Commercial Leasing Diva podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, rate and review us, like and subscribe. You know the drill. The podcast is produced and edited by Matthew Salanoa. The Commercial Leasing Diva podcast is sponsored in part by Commercial Leasing Law Seminars. If you want to learn more about commercial leasing, and why wouldn't you, please check out my e-courses by visiting my website, www.jleasinglaw.com. And right now we have 3 courses, 2 on the dreaded AIR lease form and drafting the addendum, and then a 5-week course on commercial leasing basics, which takes a deep dive into letters of intent for commercial leases. Hope to see you in one of the classes. Thank you so much again, and we'll see you next time.